Part 1. Welcome to the trail, dirt, disease, and 1,000 hooves. Picture this. 2,000 head of longhorn cattle, stretching as far as the eye can see, their horns slicing the early light like a forest of bone. Ahead of them, just dirt, dust, and a whole lot of misery. You were a cowboy on a cattle drive, maybe 17, maybe 35. No one cared how old you were, only that you could ride, stay awake for 18 hours, and not fall off your horse when fever hit. You signed up because you were broke, desperate, or stupid, usually all three. The trail boss gave you your orders. You'd ride point, flank, swing, or drag. If you were new, you got drag. That meant riding behind 2,000 animals kicking dirt, piss, and manure into your face for 12 hours a day. Your lungs turned brown, your skin cracked like old leather, and you hadn't even hit the bad part yet. Sickness didn't knock, it galloped into your ear, was more common than rain. They called it trail gut. You'd squat behind a bush, cursing the beans, bacon grease, or whatever bad water you drank the day before. There was no doctor, no outhouse, no mercy. Just hope you didn't faint and fall into a cow pie. Fevers hit without warning. One rider burned up in his saddle, just keeled over mid-trot. They buried him right there on the side of the trail. No prayers, no cross, just a shallow grave and a boot on a stick to mark the spot. They say trail drives were romantic. Open sky, free land, rugged men under the stars. That's because they never smelled a fever-slicked blanket after 6 days of vomiting under it. Food? Hope you like beans. Again, meals were simple: beans, biscuits, and if you were lucky, bacon. Every morning started with black coffee that could strip rust from a horseshoe. The cook, called the cookie, was half mad, half magician. He somehow fed 15 men with a skillet, a sack of flour, and one dented pot. Fresh meat, only if something died. One day a steer broke its leg in a river crossing. They shot it, skinned it, and had steaks for supper. Nobody asked how long the body had been bloating in the sun. Hunger always won. By week 2, men started dreaming out loud. Biscuits with gravy, pies, a warm plate. One guy swore he saw his mother handing him cornbread in the clouds. That night, he tried to bite the flap of the chuck wagon like it was a pie crust. You rode, you sweated, you bled. The work never stopped. Cattle spooked easily. A sneeze, a clap of thunder, even a badly timed fart could send them running in a blind stampede. You leapt from your blanket, boots half on, saddle flapping as you chased 50 head through a pitch-black field. More than once, a rider disappeared, trampled under a herd. In the morning, all that was left might be a stirrup, a bloody glove, or nothing at all. You didn't have time to mourn. The cattle didn't wait. You rode on. Sleep was a gamble most nights. You curled up on the dirt, wrapped in your blanket roll. If it rained, you stayed wet. If it froze, you shivered. And if you were lucky enough to actually sleep, there was always the risk of waking up with a snake under your saddle. The stars overhead didn't look poetic after 12 hours of saddle sores. They looked like the only witnesses to your misery. And still, you got up the next day, because turning back wasn't an option. You got paid when you reached the railhead, if you reached it. Until then, it was one day at a time, one meal at a time, and one more stretch of trail between you and hell. And that was just the first week. Part 2, when hunger sets in. So does madness. After 2 weeks on the trail, time stopped meaning anything. There was no morning or night, just riding and not riding. Sleep came in short gasps. Food came cold, if at all. Your clothes never dried. Your feet never felt clean. And the cattle never stopped moving. Your body gave out long before the herd did. Hands cracked until they bled. Lips split wide open under the sun. Some men wrapped their fingers in strips of canvas just to hold the reins. Blisters turned into sores. Sores turned into infections. And still, you rode. You learned not to talk much. Not because of some cowboy code, but because every word felt like wasted energy. Water was the true enemy. Creeks dried up. Wells ran foul. Puddles looked clean until they weren't. The worst was alkali water. Looked like heaven. Clear, still, just waiting in the desert basin. One sip, and your insides twisted like barbed wire. The cook refused to boil it. Said it was devil's spit. One drover ignored him and drank anyway. He didn't ride the next day. or ever again. You watched your canteen like a treasure chest. Sometimes the water inside was hotter than your coffee, but you drank it anyway. Even warm water was better than praying for rain and choking on dust. And then came the temperschunger does strange things to men. One cowboy accused another of stealing jerky, no proof, just suspicion. 2 minutes later, fists were flying and someone's tooth hit the fire pit. There were no referees. You fought until one man quit or the others dragged you off. Broken noses weren't a big deal. Black eyes were common. You could spot the new guys. They were the ones with both eyes still white. The trail boss didn't care unless you missed your shift. Get back in the saddle or go home, he'd say, which was funny because no one remembered what home looked like anymore. Rain made it worse when the storm hit. It hit hard. The ground turned to soup. Hooves slipped, wagons sank, and the herd turned skittish. You couldn't build a fire. You couldn't stay dry. You tried to sleep standing up, back to the wind, hat down low like a scarecrow with a stomachache. You smelled like wet leather and old beans. One man tried to dry his socks by the fire, fell asleep, woke up with one sock missing and the other half burned. He rode with cold feet for the rest of the drive. Sometimes, even the cattle broke down. Cows got sick, too. They'd limp, cough, refuse to move. The weak ones got left behind or shot. It was cruel, but necessary. If one animal lagged, the whole herd slowed. And time was money. One steer walked with a swollen leg for 3 days before it collapsed. The cook butchered it by lantern light. Nobody asked if the meat was safe, they just ate. And then, one night, someone Snappet was a quiet type, always did his job, never complained. But the day had been long, and the chuck wagon ran out of biscuits. At first, he just sat there, silent. Then he stood up, walked over to the cookie, and poured a whole pot of coffee into the dirt. The camp froze. The cook picked up a ladle. The cowboy picked up a tin plate. And just like that, they were swinging. No words, just metal clanging and men shouting. The fight didn't last long, but the message stuck. Even the quiet ones had limits, because the cattle weren't the only things being driven. The men were too, and not all of them would make it to the end of the trail in one piece, not in body, and sure as hell not in mind. Next, what happened when the drive turned deadly? Stampedes, lightning storms, and what it meant to sleep with your boots on and your gun within reach. Part 3, Stampedes, Storms, and the Nights You Didn't Wake. Up from there were 2 words every cowboy feared more than anything on the trail: night stampede. It usually started with a flash of lightning, or a sharp crack of thunder, or nothing at all, just a subtle shift in the air. Like the sky holding its breath, the cattle would stir, snort, shift their weight. One would panic, then another. Then all hell would break loose. Stampede, a word that meant run or die. Imagine 2,000 terrified longhorns bolting into the blackness, hooves pounding like war drums, dust flying so thick you couldn't see your own horse, riders scrambling to mount up in the dark, some half-dressed, gripping reins with one hand and a pistol in the other, not to shoot, but to fire into the air, trying to turn the herd. Turn the lead cow, turn the lead cow. That was the rule. If you could just curve the front runners into a circle, the rest might follow. If you failed, you died. One cowboy tripped in the dark. They found what was left of him the next morning, or at least, they think it was him. The only thing untouched was his hat, still sitting where he dropped it. Stampedes didn't care how tough you were. They didn't slow down for anyone. You either rode fast and smart, or you disappeared. Lightning wasn't just pretty storms. Came fast, and when they came angry. Cowboys rode into the teeth of thunderstorms with nothing but a slicker and a prayer. Lightning struck trees. It struck the ground. It struck men. One drover held the reins too tight during a storm. Lightning hit a tree 5 feet away. The charge jumped from the branch, down the saddle, and into his hand. He lived, barely. But he didn't hold reins the same way again. You learn fast not to lean on anything metal, and to never, ever sleep on high ground. Lightning looked for targets. Cowboys were easy ones. The nights were long. If you survived them, each man took a night shift, 2 hours of circling the herd, humming softly. Not talking, humming. A slow, low sound meant to calm the cattle. Some men sang, some whistled. Most just mumbled, too tired to care if it worked. You weren't out there for fun. You were out there to make sure the herd didn't bolt. And, if they did, you were the first to die under their hooves. It was lonely. Just you, your horse, the stars, and a sea of cattle that might turn into a wall of death at any second. And even when it was calm, the fear never left. Sometimes the wind would stop, the cattle would sleep, the night would be quiet. That was the worst of all, because that's when your thoughts came in. You remembered the men who didn't make it, the ones buried in shallow graves along the trail, the one who disappeared during a river crossing, the kid who coughed blood one morning and was gone by nightfall. You thought about why you were doing this, the $30 at the end of the drive. It didn't seem worth it anymore, but there was no turning back. You were in it. You had to finish. And then, the fights turned deadly. It started small. A punch here, a shove there. But one night, someone pulled a knife. The fight was over a saddlebag, or a woman back home, or maybe it was just 2 weeks of bad food, no sleep, and raw nerves exploding into violence. One man got slashed across the ribs. Another lost a finger. The cook grabbed his shotgun, fired it in the air, and screamed. Next man to bleed gets buried with the beans. That quieted things down for a while. But everyone knew it could happen again. You weren't just fighting the land, you were fighting each other. The trail didn't just kill with storms and cattle. It wore men down until they turned on one another. Some left the drive midway, walking back alone. Some made it to the end with scars, missing teeth, or eyes that wouldn't meet yours anymore. Some never made it at all. And the worst part, you still had 100 miles to go. Part 4. The end of the trail wasn't the end of the suffering. After weeks on the trail, the land began to change. The grass thinned out, dust rose higher. The cattle stumbled more. You could smell the end of the drive, but you weren't sure if you were still whole enough to get there. Boots wore thin. Saddles cracked. Men talked less. Some just mumbled to themselves. And when the railhead finally appeared, the distant smokestack, the glint of steel, the faint whistle of a train, no one cheered. They just stared. It was over. But it didn't feel like a victory. The body was done before the trail was. Every joint ached. Your back felt like rawhide pulled too tight. Hands were swollen. Your thighs rubbed raw from the saddle. You smelled like a mixture of sweat, manure, and moldy beans. You looked 20 years older than you were. Some men collapsed beside the chuck wagon and didn't move for hours. One rider slid off his horse and fell flat. He wasn't dead, just too tired to walk. The cook poured whiskey into his mouth. He didn't flinch. There was no applause, no medals, just the ground, a cup, and the sickly silence of too much endured. And then came the pay. If you were lucky, you got $30. Trail bosses got more, sometimes $100. But the average hand earned $1 a day minus what he owed for gear, tack repairs, and meals along the way. Some cowboys walked away with $10 in their pocket and teeth still loose from a fistfight. A few didn't get paid at all. A storm had scattered the herd. Dozens of cattle lost. The owner was angry, claimed they didn't deliver the product. The cowboys threatened him. He threatened the sheriff. The cook just rolled his eyes and kept stirring the beans. Justice wasn't a guarantee. It was a coin flip. Then came the saloon. Money didn't last. Most cowboys stumbled straight into the nearest bar. Whiskey was cheap. So was bad judgment. Fights broke out. So did laughter. A few found a bed with a woman or a chair near a piano. Others sat in silence, staring into their drink like it owed them something. One rider spent his entire pay in one night. Poker, a bottle, and a broken nose later. He was back on the street, boots missing, singing to himself in the dirt. The next morning, he signed up for another drive. No one stayed a cowboy forever. The trail broke men slowly. 1, drive was survivable. 2, was dangerous. 3, you either became a ghost of yourself or you disappeared entirely. Some drifted from town to town, always chasing the next job, the next herd, the next promise of a better route. Others limped back to farms or city jobs, swearing they'd never sit a saddle again. And a few just vanished. One day, you'd ask, "Whatever happened to Jake?" And someone would say, "Last I heard, He went up the Red River Trail, never made it back. That was the end of the story. What really happened during cattle drives? Not the stories in books, not the paintings of clean-shaven men under golden skies. The real trail was blood, dust, fever, fists, and bones buried without names. It was waking up with your arm numb and a snake sunning itself. On your saddle, it was chasing a herd through, lightning and praying not to fall. It was fighting a man you shared meals with for 3 weeks straight because the beans ran out. And it was the silent ride back, paid, bruised, and no longer sure why you ever left in the first place. You didn't conquer the trail, you survived it, if you were lucky.